Well, we don't want to do this, but we have to. An unfortunate ending to the Toronto Maple Leaf season. Lost in seven to Tampa Bay. As we're recording this, it is Tuesday, May the 24th. They just eliminated Florida, 4 games, complete sweep. Before we dive into that and sort of how that sort of has adjusted maybe your thinking on the series, because it has adjusted mine. What were your feelings going through the series? What did you think about how the Leafs played? Were you in less pain than last year? More pain?
Mm-hmm.
How'd you feel?
Well, I think, starting back, but before the series, we had an episode we talked about what we were expecting the series to be like. And we knew it was going to be, the toughest challenge that the Leafs have had, in the Matthews era. The back-to-back Stanley Cup champions are not going to be an easy out. And, the series was kind of everything that we expected it to be, a long series, back and forth series. We knew that Tampa wasn't going to be, losing back-to-back games because they're crazy stats. Vasilevsky's just insane when after a loss. So we knew it was going to be tough. After game one, big 5-0 convincing win at home, definitely feeling a little bit better about the Leafs' chances, but, you had to stay calm. You had to, realize that, hey, it's not going to be, an easy series still. It's not like we're going to win this after game one. It's going to be a long series. Game two, obviously, Tampa bounces back. Game three, I'm feeling a lot better. That was a gutsy win, even though we played pretty poorly after getting the lead. Game four, awful start. I think after game five is when, the tide started to turn a little bit and you get some more hope. They were down early. They come back. They get a lot of momentum heading into a game six where a lot of people thought, they're going to lose no matter what. And they're probably going to get run out of the building too. It's going to be, a blowout game, but the Leafs, they showed up. They played a very good game. Not the greatest start, I guess, but they had a great second period. And then the third period, with the penalty, the 5-on-3 is really what bit them. And then, heading into game seven, kind of expected it to go to 7 games. And I mean, it's just another penalty on Hall that was called that turned the tide, and a tough one there. And, even after that, when Riley scored that big goal, you had hope. And when I was watching it, I still had hope right up until like Tavares had the puck, with seconds ticking away there. And I thought he could have maybe passed it over to Matthews, get a shot. And I had hope till about literally the final buzzer. Like I didn't think it was going to end. And when it ended, definitely a different feeling than last year. I think last year was anger. You were mad at the team because of how poorly that they played, and you knew that they could definitely beat a team like Montreal, and they were up 3-1, and you're mad at them, and you want players out of town, stuff like that. This year, you look at how well that they played against a team like Tampa and how close they were to knocking them out, and it's just sad. It's tough because they were so close to doing it, and that's why it's more devastating than last year, I think, because we believed in this group, and I still believe in this group. But what about you? How are you feeling when that final horn went off in game 7?
Disappointment, obviously. I think every Leafs fan was disappointed. I think it was also, I was sort of impressed by how well they played. We hadn't really ever seen that before in a Leafs team, at least in my life and watching the Leafs. I've never seen them put up that much of a fight in a series against that good of a team. Boston 2013, they never should have been in that series. Reimer basically dragged them by their throats to game 7. The Washington series games goes to 6. They had no business being in that series either. The 2 Boston series, You could argue the second one, the Leafs were the better team, but Mike Babcock sort of killed them a little bit on that front. And then Columbus, Montreal, they just didn't live up to expectations. They weren't good enough. And this was the first series where they were good enough, I think, as a team. Quickly, you talked a little bit about the refereeing and some of the penalty calls. There's a lot of discussion, sort of vitriol and frustration with the refereeing in this series. They called it a lot tighter than we're used to seeing in past years, but they weren't very consistent. So were you a fan of that refereeing style, or do you think the officials could have done a much better job and sort of screwed them out of the series?
I mean, I'm not one to blame a series loss on the officials. I think definitely those calls that I talked about before, were the difference in the series, unfortunately. And I honestly didn't mind the amount of penalties that they were calling early on in the series. At least I think once we hit game 6 is kind of when they put the whistles away a little bit, and then in the third period they did call some on the Leafs that bit them. But I don't think the refs are to blame. I think the number one thing for refs in the playoffs is consistency. If you are going to call, those small little penalties, then you got to do that for the entire series, for both teams as well. And I think there were a lot of situations where the Leafs were getting penalties and Tampa wasn't getting called for the same things that they were doing. And it's unfortunate because that's kind of how they lost in some way. The 5-on-3, the Kampf high stick really wasn't a high stick. It hit
his shoulder.
It hit his shoulder, exactly. And that turned the tide. And then obviously the Kerfoot one is a clear penalty, but that's what gave them the 5-on-3 there. And there's the goal. And then I guess we should talk about the biggest one, the Hall one on the Tavares goal. I mean, I'm still going back and forth on this. Like, it's a penalty, but and I know it's tough because I'm a fan of the Leafs and I don't want to be biased, but I think it is a penalty. It's just really unfortunate timing, But I do think that was a penalty at the time, though. And when I saw the replay, it looked like Hall was trying to stop up, and Cirelli kind of bumped into him. So he was doing everything he could to avoid taking a penalty there, but it's still interference, and it still gave Tavares a clear lane to the slot to shoot that puck. So I hate to admit it, but that is the right call. I just wish that maybe Tavares heard the whistle before shooting it in. But maybe it makes you feel better. Like, it's 2-2, right? It's still a 2-2 game.
Yeah, I think game 6 and game 7 were terribly officiated. You look at the first goal of the game 7, and Kampf is quite literally being held against the boards, unable to get back to defend Paul on the rush.
Yeah.
And on the second Paul goal, somebody literally pulls Jake Muzzin's stick out of his hands so he can't get his stick on Paul's stick before he gets the shot off. He has to try to go back to get the stick from the player. So I think there were a lot of missed calls on that front. I agree. I think it was a penalty. It should have been called, and it was called. But I think they did miss some pretty blatant interference, stuff like that, calls on Tampa that cost the Leafs. And it goes both ways, but I think consistency is sort of the bottom line, what everybody wants in the playoffs. And it really didn't happen in that series. It was all over the place constantly. So I think it hurt them a lot, but I've liked the way they were able to bounce back. I thought David Kampf was really good in the series. I thought Justin Hall had a bit of a bounce back. He had a couple tough games, but he played really well in game 5. Giordano was good. Who stood out to you, though? Was there anybody who really made an impression on how well the Leafs played in terms of them being an integral part of that?
TJ Brody. I think he was the backbone in the Leafs defense. And if you don't have him, maybe they lose earlier in the series. I think that's a key piece for the Leafs there. And penalty kill, 5-on-5 play. Yeah, he was great. Just the little stick plays that he makes. He saved a goal in, I think it was game 4, one of the road games, on like a Stamkos open net. I think it was game 3, I want to say. He unfortunately gets beat on the Paul thing, but I mean, he did whatever he could there, and he really stood out to me. He was playing a lot of big minutes. And then just the big boys as well, like Matthews and Marner, especially Marner. I think he had a really good postseason. There wasn't really a player that played poorly, I think. Like you said, that Hall had that bad game, but he did bounce back in game 6 and game 7. I think, like honestly, you would just have to be picky about it to say that someone played bad. You could always ask for more out of Tavares in the first 5 games, but first 4 games, but 5, 6, and 7 really stepped up. Mikheyev and Engvall are maybe at the bottom list for me, but yeah,
Okay.
yeah. They didn't score. Mikheyev and Engvall couldn't score.
I sort of agree on Mikheyev. He got 2 empty net goals, so he boosted his stats a little bit. I thought he was a bit invisible. I think Engvall played really well, given what he was tasked to do, which is basically play anywhere in the lineup and have to play up to that standard. I think he did a pretty good job. I was disappointed by the fourth line guys, though, specifically Simmons and Clifford. They just
true.
they were terrible.
Well, Clifford only played like a couple minutes.
Yes, and yet they cost them series, or they cost them game. Clifford, 5 minutes into game 1, gets a 5-minute major for boarding, which was a 5-minute major for boarding, and put them on the penalty kill. Ultimately, they did win that game and sort of use that penalty kill as momentum, but you can't have a guy doing that. And Simmons, 2 penalties, I think it was in game 4. Game 4, I think, where it was like the cross-checking penalty and one other penalty where they scored on both power plays, and it killed the Leafs. We're going to do an off-season sort of early preview in our next video, which I'm very excited about. And we'll sort of walk through what sort of could happen with this team. But yeah, I'm not a huge fan of them right now. I think they need to be a lot better. But I think they could be utilized I think they could have different not lessons, tasks, shall we say.
You mean Simmons and Clifford?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we'll get into that in the next video, I guess. I have my thoughts on what they could do, what their roles could be next year. But I mean, I thought Blackwell was good. I thought Spezza was good. And Kasha wasn't terrible either. So I mean, that was the fourth line that they used in the later half of that series, and I didn't have any complaints.
I did like that fourth line. When I was saying fourth line guys, I meant more the fourth line Gooners.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I get what Keefe was trying to do early in the series and why those guys were in the lineup, but it just didn't work out. Yeah.
And when he switched it up, they basically that new fourth line completely negated the fourth line for Tampa. When apart from Perry, who obviously scored like on the power play and stuff.
Yeah.
Maroon basically disappeared, and I don't remember hearing Pierre-Edouard Bellemar's name for the last 3 games of the series. So I think he learned, and ultimately it was a really even series. And my big sort of takeaway from it was like, this team is good, and you give it another year to sort of gel and let Matthews, Marner get better. Maybe utilize Tavares in a different way, which I'm sure we'll dive into on our next video. There's reason for optimism with this team. And
yeah, I think like my biggest takeaway, and I agree with all of those points. Like, this team is good, run it back. Like we're close, but it's hockey. Anything can happen in hockey. That's why it's the toughest trophy to win in sports. And like they were this close to beating Tampa, one goal away from sending it to overtime. And it's a penalty, a bad bounce, a breakaway, just a little bang bang play that caused the Nick Paul goal and the second goal that he scored. Like it's a game of inches. It's so hard. There's such a fine line between winning and losing, and that's what the coaches were saying. It's hard to win. So the Leafs shouldn't be hanging their heads. I don't think they really are. Like they know how close that they were. I think the fans realize that they were so close to doing it. And that's why it's so disappointing because of how close they were. And especially now you see how Tampa just swept the Florida Panthers like it was nothing. And you see the potential like that could have been the Leafs. I have my thoughts on that. I don't think it would have been a sweep if the Leafs played Florida. I think it would be a closer series, but definitely think, why do we have a timer? This is weird. 2 people.
I think they might have changed Zoom stuff, but
Okay.
yeah, like
Yeah.
in terms of that series though, I think the Leafs, it made me feel better about the Leafs losing in the first round because I said it and it sort of reinforced what I thought. This series between Tampa and the Leafs was the conference final. I think Tampa's going to the Cup final now.
Oh yeah, it's tough. It's going to be tough to beat them.
They steamrolled Florida without their best center in Braden Point. They steamrolled them. Like I think it's them going to the Cup final. And when you look at it like that, the Leafs got really unlucky with their opponent in the first round. And you have to look at it like this team was on that level. They could have that. This easily could have been them if 2 calls by
exactly
hadn't been made.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm impressed by the Leafs. I know everybody's clowning Leafs fans for saying run it back, but what else do you do? It doesn't.
I think it's the smart thing to do. Yeah.
So we'll see. I think there'll be changes, but that'll be our next video, which you'll have to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can see it when it first goes live. Hit the bell for notifications if we even have that. Like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. And we'll be back at some point, either today, tomorrow, next week. Who knows? With another video breaking down the Leafs' possible offseason moves and plans and stuff that I sort of came up with. So make sure to check out that when it goes live.